and floor is yours.
Oh, terrific. So I kind of got conscripted to do this this talk on Workbench, and with Mark and Jordan kind of being present and in the room, I expect to be corrected a fair bit. So I'm thinking we'll probably do this more or less workshop style. So I would invite anybody to jump in at any time with anything that they may like to add. So the Workbench tool I've been using a fair bit on a couple of different projects lately. Let me just pull some notes over here. So it's a command line tool written by Mark, and it's designed to import large amounts of data into what we're now calling Islandora 2, using the REST interfaces, which are not extraordinarily robust. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I've been using it not exclusively, but primarily for migrations. So it really doesn't matter where your data comes from in the first place. It can be from an i7 instance, it can be from another i8, it honestly doesn't matter. All you're doing is populating spreadsheets, and those spreadsheets are being read by the Workbench utility, which is written in Python. And the results of that spreadsheet are marshaled together into a form that we can fire off to the Drupal REST interface. And Mark's actually got a couple of different versions built into the module. One is for older Island 8, and I think it was 8.6 maybe when the new REST interfaces came out, REST endpoint. So we'd used Islandora specific endpoints up to PHP 8.6 and the built-in Drupal ones after that. So the idea is we take our data wherever it comes from, and it honestly doesn't matter, build the spreadsheets and then fire the spreadsheets in. So it's fairly straightforward, and the documentation on a Workbench is very good. Every time any one of us have integrated any new code into it, and lest it sound like I'm taking credit where none is due, this is overwhelmingly Mark's work. I've thrown a couple of odds and ends in there, and I think a few other people have as well. But when changes are made to the interface, the documentation, which is very complete and very human readable, is brought up to speed at the same time. So essentially, what we're doing is we're taking that spreadsheet and we're using that as the basis, and we fire off Workbench as an executable, and by way of a configuration file, we tell it how to interact with that. Now let me see about sharing screens. And if I've done this right, you should be able to see my, are we all looking at a config file now?
Looks good.
Okay, this is the idea. So this would be a fairly typical config file. It lists the task at the top, and then the host and the username and password. The username and password are not your SSH credentials, which is a mistake I've seen people run into once or twice. They are, in fact, your Drupal password to log into whatever your host site is, whatever you're importing the data into. So I had this originally set up with a local install straight out of the box of Islandora, and then the input CSV, which is in this case a Google Sheet. And you can use either a native CSV, or you can use a Google Sheet, or you can use Excel. I really like Google Sheets because Google does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It makes sure that that random commas scattered throughout your data are properly escaped, and everything's looked after. So the form where it arrives is going to be something that Workbench can handle. So there's a lot less mitigation to be done at that point. The caveat that I would throw out at this point is that this will fail unless your Google Sheet is wide open, meaning anybody anywhere in the world with the URL will be able to gain access to that spreadsheet. So it's still remarkably secure. I don't know if you've ever seen a URL for a Google spreadsheet, but it's not guessable. So somebody would have to have access to that. But if you're really, really, really concerned, you can always populate the spreadsheet, make sure everything's lined up, everything's good with the permissions locked down, export it as a CSV, and then reference that actual CSV file in your code base somewhere. I've personally never found the need for that. It's what we do if we have assets which can't be exposed to the public. I'm more likely to use those as a direct file. As it stands now within the spreadsheet, you have a file column, which must be called file, and that has the address of the file that you're going to use to build the media. And that file can either be on a remote server, so prefaced with HTTP or HTTPS, although I guess it's not possible to have a preference with HTTPS unless it's also preference with HTTP. So it's either something you're going to bring in through REST, or it's something that you have in your file system already. So if you have something which is very sensitive and you don't want anyone to know what the URL to that is, then the smart thing to do is to pull that down using curl or wget or whatever your favorite file handling protocol is, and then make a reference to that directly. So let me switch this around a little bit. Stop the sharing temporarily. I'm going to share again. But this time, if I can find it. So you should be looking at a spreadsheet now, and you can see it's all fairly well blocked out. The columns headers are not optional; they're not mapped. The documentation is very clear on things like file and reserved names, and every other file that you see along here, field date, field volume, field number, etc. Those must match up with the machine name of your Drupal install. And if you reference a field that isn't there, then Workbench gets very cranky. Fortunately, Workbench does have a check feature you can run before you go. So in your config file, actually, let me just switch back for a second. Should be looking here again in your config file. It has all the basic information, but I'll get on to how to run that again in a second. So Workbench has a couple of flags that you can pass to it, telling it how to behave. So you run Workbench as an executable, and then you set the config variable, and the config goes to whatever your config file is. I personally find it handy to build within my structure a subfolder of configs, and then I reference them through config / whatever the config name is. That way I can keep a bunch of them there. They're easy to keep track of. So most of what we're talking about today is different ways of using Workbench, and this is absolutely a command line tool, and you can run it from the command line once you've got it properly set up. So to properly set it up, you pull Islandora Workbench in from the Mark Jordan's GitHub repository, and that's easily discoverable. I can paste the link in if anybody doesn't have that. Then it's just git clone, put it the repository name, and that will create the directory for you. And you can run from there. I find it far easier to do the installation on your local computer, and then take an IDE and have the IDE reference that particular folder. Now, the one I use is called PyCharm. It's free for nothing. It's made by the JetBrains people, and most Drupal developers, certainly in the pre-Docker days, were using PHP Storm to write their code. So you're probably already familiar with the interface. So this is what it looks like. It's easy to use. It's completely configurable. If we come down to preferences and appearance, everybody has a massive code crush on dark themes now. My own personal preferences is I keep my I keep my Python light, and I keep my PHP dark. Makes it easier for me to distinguish as I'm going around. But the point is, it's a free IDE. It's exceptionally easy to use, and the biggest advantage for me is that when I'm running the code, I can run it directly from here, seeing exactly what's going on. And if instead of running the code, if I set it to debug, then I'm going through line by line, and I can see exactly where issues are presenting themselves. So here's the way I would set it up. As we can come in here and we can edit configurations. So if I come in, I want to create a new configuration. Set that up as Python. I'm going to name this demo. The script path is going to be Workbench. And then I can pass in whatever parameters I would like to pass in at this particular point. So it's always going to be config. And I can put my particular configs in there. And now when I run it, it will attempt to run this. Now, I don't have that site up and running right now. But the point is, when it's time for me to run that, well, here, I'll give you an example. If I just run this, it's going to tell me very quickly that that site isn't there. So I get my output down here. Yeah, so it's telling me that it's not there. And it does some fairly excellent checks to begin with. It checks to see if it's there. It checks to see if the integration module is in place. It checks to see if you have all the necessary permissions, and it will report back immediately. If I want to check out the condition of my spreadsheet, I'm going to edit configurations here again, and I'm going to throw in another parameter. And if I do that, it runs in check mode, which incorporates absolutely no data, but will let you know if everything is configured properly. So I can let me see if I can demo that for you. Yeah, so here I'm running this in check mode. So this won't interfere with the job, which is already running. So you can see what's happening here. Is it's telling me that my connection is verified. The configuration file has all the required values, didn't check for optional values. So that means if you have something in your node, which is set up as a non-optional field, it will let you know that it's missing essential values. Now, this is a fairly slow check process, and we won't run through all that. But what I mostly wanted to demonstrate is this something I can literally do just with a click. So I can stop and start it up here. I can start and restart. And the best part is, if I set that up on debug mode, as that's running through the code, it will walk me through that code line by line. So at any given point, I can check and see exactly what I'm doing. So if something's not working, one of the things about the interaction between Python and Drupal is you'll very often get error messages that aren't actually the error. It's just the way they present themselves. So sometimes there's a little back translation to go on. So for instance, there's one you'll see sometimes if there's a missing value, or if there's a value in your taxonomy which isn't correct, it will come back and just say that it's received a null value when there's actually a value there. So it just takes a while to figure that out. And doing this makes it far, far easier. So here, as you can see, I can step through that. And it's taking a while to figure that out. Anyway, I won't waste your time with that. That's something that you can easily see on your own. So this is just a way of setting things up, and it's a way of working through your code, and it's a way of making sure that you have everything in place that you need. Now, what I've discovered is that so far with every major migration I've done, there's been some little tweak, there's been some weird consideration that nobody's considered in the past. So it's fairly easy for me here. If there's something's not working under my circumstances, I can put in a pull request on that, and Mark is unbelievably responsive with that. We normally get results back very, very quickly. But if I have a job that needs to be done, it's pretty easy for me to fork my own local branch here when I can see exactly what's going on. I can read that line by line and see where we're going. So this is what I do to run it as a background task, as a local task. And it's really important to remember that because this is all done through REST interfaces, it honestly doesn't matter where you're running your code. So you can run it on your laptop. You can run it on any computer that has access to the host computer. So in my particular case for this one, I have to run, because it's locked down, I run this on a VPN, but I can run the same Python code from any other server that has access to the host server, including, and this is really important, including on the host server itself. So just to speed things up, if I'm bringing a big file in here now, if I've got a 4 meg file and I have to pull it down from one site, store it on my local box temporarily, and then fire it off to the host site, that's a lot of movement. That's a lot of bandwidth. And especially, as you can see, my internet is non-sensational lately. So this can really slow things down. So the quick way to do it is to do your testing locally, make sure everything's fine, run in some sample objects, then take that exact same config file with absolutely no changes to it whatsoever, and then stick that on the server where you actually want to run the code. So for this one, this particular migration that I'm doing, I take that and I put it on the host server in a folder that I have there. It's going onto a Docker box, but this process is not Dockerized. This runs just as a straight up plain vanilla Workbench, and that will speed things way, way up, which is great, but it has its own set of problems. And one of which is that REST is not extraordinarily robust. So what you'll find is you get a lot of errors. In fact, let me see what I've got here. Okay, so let's stop again. So you can see on the terminal that this is the log file from the job which is running at this very second, and you can see there's quite a few errors, and they're all 500 errors. So this is what is happening when the system gets overwhelmed a little bit. So what I've found, so yeah, so what I like to do is, because I want to create a mitigation script for this. So I'm going to have a lot of errors, and there's a big job. The import that I'm working on now is about 3,500 lines long, and there are going to be probably a few hundred errors in there. So what I need to do is find out where it's errored. And you can see that it's telling me exactly what file errored, but it does not tell me what node that it errored on. So in fact, let me show you this one instead, which is maybe. If I just grep error from the Workbench log, I see the errors, but they give me no context. So what I've done, this is a fairly straightforward command. It's grepping B2, which means it pulls up the 2 lines before it finds the error from the Workbench log, and then I get rid of all the info terms and all the info media because I don't really want those. And then when I run those, I get this particular format, which spits this out, and it gives me the info for where the node was created with the node number on the end of it, and then the error itself. So I'm going to copy all this into my buffer, and I'll show you what I do with that. So here I've written a mediation screen. Is everybody able to see that?
No.
I don't see anything right now.
We got it now?
Nope.
What are you looking at? That should be.
Just
Oh.
so far.
Okay, here we are. How about now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so let me embiggen this. So this is the snippet that I just pulled, and this is a mediation script that I wrote, and I have that up in my GitHub, and I'll paste the link in for that. I made no effort to generalize this at all. I don't know how universal this is, but it will give you some basis to work on. So I have a parsing script here, and what that will do is that grabs that file, and then splits it up and then parses through. And let me just do this. So when I run the parser now, that will spit out a CSV when I'm done. So the CSV prints out here. If it's a small one, I copy and paste it, but I also write that out to a file, which is a mediation CSV. So what this does, when if you're doing an add media job, you need the node ID, you need the file, which again can be either local or can be accessible through REST, and then it has an optional media use TID at the end of it. And these particular failures are all extracted text. So you can either use this directly, because this is a valid CSV, or my favorite technique is I copy that. And we're going to do this again. Let me see. Man, a lot of cruft here. This is a technique which is kind of invaluable. Is you paste, and you get this little doohickey at the bottom. Put that, split text to columns, and now you've got an ingest sheet that's ready to go. So I'm going to flip back here. Just let me check something. I have some passwords to get rid of. Okay, now stop share. Share screen. Once we're back here, we set up another job, which is add media. And the add media only works if you know the node that you wish to attach the media to, which is why we went through that little song and dance that led us up to this point. I can run the add media, and the final result is completely remediated at this point. And something we've just discovered recently. There is a feature / bug / point of confusion with the new Fedora that it will apparently only accept a finite number of files with the same name. So if you're importing from an i7 instance, all your files are called download. And the actual file name on a media isn't particularly relevant because the media has its own name. But if you do not disambiguate, as it turns out, after you've ingested a couple of hundred objects very successfully, it suddenly starts throwing 504 errors, which are timeout errors. And it's not a timeout at all. What it is it's saying it just plain won't accept that. So it took a fair amount of jigging around before I figured out what the problem was. So if you just include this line in your config saying use title node for media, it will disambiguate yourself and you're back in the ingestion business. So that's kind of how I use the IDE, how I do my remediation. I see my time is almost up. So if anybody has any questions or comments or